Discover how CISOs are bridging the gap between operational technology and enterprise security in this Rewind episode, reshaping the future of industrial cybersecurity from the ground up. No longer confined to enterprise server room oversight, CISOs now find themselves navigating the complexities from the boardroom to the plant floor, where a single breach could halt production or compromise critical infrastructure. Welcome to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. In each episode, we dive into the world of industrial cybersecurity. Join us as we cover the latest trends, innovations, and practical insights as we talk with leaders and practitioners across the industry. Gear up and let's get into this week's episode.
Organizations have all different kinds of metrics and methods and methodologies determining on how good they are at making good. So then that means you have to know your risk. And the work that we do, and we do this all day, every day, we walk into plants, we find risk all the time. Anybody who sits there and thinks, we're good, we got a pretty good handle on what goes on in here, no, you don't. You don't. Between the remote access coming in and out of the environment, external connections, IT inadvertently pushing patches, booting a switch, scanning the plant floor control systems, causing disruption and communication failures on that front. If you can't see that, if you're not managing that, how are you going to measure that? The downtime, the fact you lost an hour here, 3 hours there, 4 hours there, and over the course of a year, you've lost $5 million just on unscheduled downtime. And somebody cares about that, right? The board cares about the C-suite about that, right? How do you get your arms around that outside of just not trying to be cyber safe, but at the same time, improving your bottom line, which is important. And
it is.
And you get that with these tool sets, right? Brand spanking new tools that provide visibility into an environment that I've heard plant managers say, yeah, it's very finicky. And we got people in here all the time, not even physically on site, monkeying and manipulating, or remotely coming in, monkeying and manipulating my environment. And I can't see anybody.
Well, it goes back to supply chain.
And IT can't discern whether that's good or bad or what the heck's going on, because operations to them is, it might as well be on another planet.
You've got so many different OEMs. You have so many different suppliers in and out of that environment. You look at an automotive industry, for example, that makes a car. You've got thousands of suppliers feeding you all this stuff that comes now just in time, which is maybe a couple hours before you need it or a day before you need it. And if something happens to them, to you, anywhere in the process, it breaks.
Yeah, and we saw that, right? We saw that during COVID.
Yeah, for sure we did.
Everybody got a really good taste of what happens when your supply chain gets disrupted.
Yes.
There's been client Clorox this summer. Look what happened to them. We could go down the list of clients,
hundreds
of manufacturers that have been impacted due to cyber attacks, cost them tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars.
True.
Do you think this is a one and done? Is this a rarity thing? It doesn't happen to me. It happens every single day. And I know the board sees that and the C-suite sees that because they read the papers, they see the news, they're on the internet, they're paying attention.
But the one thing that really, even today, it surprises me. When I look back, one of the clients we worked with that had a Big Four accounting firm come in, do an assessment. They're sitting at the board level. They're talking to the board. They're talking to the C-suite. They went in, they did an OT assessment. Didn't find of the things that we did when we went in and completed that same assessment after them. And you can talk about that, but it still happens today. They trust them from an advisor, from a consultative standpoint, and they are, I wouldn't call it misleading the client. What they're doing, they're not practitioners. They don't have the same skill sets, the same talent that we do, and it's not getting the message across.
Yeah, groups that you mentioned, they're not going to go out there and crack open those panels to take a look at that ICS infrastructure, looking for the cellular modems or the Tashi boxes or the unintended wireless dongles hanging off of PLCs that most of them wouldn't even know what they were looking at when you opened up that panel, right? If you don't come from this world, if you haven't done control system work, if you're not a process engineer, controls engineer, been in a maintenance role or been in a plant or built infrastructure and manufacturing environment, you're not the person to go out there and do that work.
Well, they don't know the whole story. They understand part of it, serve a great role.
They're not the mechanics.
But they are serving the role of, we are helping educate and bring awareness to the problem. So I give them credit for that all day long. The more education and awareness, we all are doing better.
I think there needs to be some type of metric, though, that's when they look at the organization and say, can you get this done yourself internally? Do you even have chops to do it? Do you have the capability to do it? Even if you have the resources, let's just say you have a lot of resources, could they actually do this work? If they've never done it before, if they've never worked in this before, could they go get it done? No, most likely not. And even if you started today, it could take you 1 to 2 years just to become proficient at it. If you've got 30, 60, 90 plants, 100 plants in your fleet, think about the number of people. It gets very expensive very quickly when you think about the resources that you need to go and do that work, the training that is required, the tools that are required, right? See it compared to a traditional IT cybersecurity assessment compared to an OT cybersecurity assessment, it's a 3x difference. It's not that the tools are more expensive. It's not that. The type of work that has to be done to go cover a 1 million square foot facility and hit every machine center you have.
But do you think that the C-suite recognizes that? When you have a CEO or a CFO that's ultimately approving budget, if I'm a plant manager and I'm like, hey, I need these IDS tools for my industrial environment and I need $3 million, for example, does the CEO say, you don't need that? Or do they recognizing why? What's your thought? You think that they realize the size and scope of work that it takes on that plant floor?
They haven't done it before.
I would say you're spot on.
They haven't done it. Even those that have been doing it for a few years, my philosophy, you can do it right or you can do it again.
I love that.
And there's a lot of them doing it again.
Yes, there are. Yes, there are.
And so to your point, no, they're not. They don't recognize scope of effort. At the same time, you got an organization out there who quite frankly isn't paying attention either. My choice is I'm busy. I got to make goods all day, every day. My task, that's my job. This stuff over here, I don't see the value. You can't do. He's definitely not going to demonstrate the value to them.
No,
and so how do you do that? And so you have to be able to create an extension to staff who has the skills and experience and knowledge on what it is that's relevant and important to pull out of that environment. You can't measure what you're not managing, and you're not managing it today. Take asset inventory, for example. How do you do that today? Is it a manual process? At certain times of the year, you send people out with clipboards and are just out there documenting the assets that you have in the space. And are you getting the vulnerability management information? Probably not. So why wouldn't you want to do continuous monitoring? IT does continuous monitoring in their environment. Well, why would you want to do the same thing on the plant floor? And you can do that in a non-disruptive way, right? Where you're not being impacted or impeding their ability. But there's commonality, right? Continuous monitoring. IT's doing it for all of their stuff. Why aren't you doing it for your plant floor control systems, your PLCs, your HMIs, your drives, your robots, your reactors, your fillers, your labelers, your depalletizers, this equipment that you have that's connected in the plant floor? You can do the same thing to continuously monitor it for asset inventory and get vulnerability management that he's doing for all their stuff.
But I think it takes more involvement on the OT side. You can't just sit behind a desk and punch a keyboard and it just magically worked. It takes involvement. It takes time. It takes key people that are, I would call them the asset owners, the process control engineers, the teams down in the plant floor that are responsible for those assets. They have to understand that. They have to know how to interpret the data to feed that back up to that C-suite so they can make business decisions on risk.
You know how you motivate the plant floor people? Increasing their bonus. How do you increase their bonus? By doing better by making goods.
Yep.
Reduce my costs, reduce my downtime, be safe, make more goods.
But that's
your revenue goes up, their bonuses go up.
But that's part of the problem.
But if you told a plant manager, it's like, how would you like to add an extra $50,000 to your bonus this year? You think he'd be interested in that?
He absolutely.
I'm sure he would be.
But if I'm the CISO and I say, okay, to do that, I need to take your plant down for a week because I need to do all these updates on those Windows 7 machines and those Windows 10 machines and all that stuff that's vulnerable. And I'm going to replace all those PLCs 10 years old or 15 years old because they have a vulnerability in them. And I'm going to need you to be closed for a month.
Never going to happen.
Exactly. That's exactly correct.
And you're not going to replace the Windows 10 machine that's end of life or Windows X7. You're not going to do that either. That's why IT walks away. Once you know that, then that's when they fall back and say, I can't influence that. I can't change that. So why do I want to be responsible for that? That's their position. And even worse, when you have an OEM who's dictating for everybody on what you can do to that machine center, now it's just a black box sitting on your plant floor that does all this magical stuff and nobody knows what's going on inside of it. So that's a whole different discussion. So how do you get through all of that stuff? And it's by starting a process of beginning to do continuous monitoring to set a baseline on your vulnerabilities that you have. If you've got PLCs that haven't been patched in 5 years, I know you're not going to go out there and immediately start patching them, but there might be some patches, some firmware updates that you can push to them to start minimizing. Instead of having 300 vulnerabilities, maybe you can get down to 100. Turn some things off that shouldn't be out there, like PLCs that are acting as web servers, or soft PLCs out there that you have no idea what's on those, right? And we find soft PLCs out there in the environment. That's a full-blown Linux computer, can have Windows running on it as far as, and it's completely out of IT's purview, and he's not going to dictate, do squat anything to that soft PLC that's running those laser cutters. C-suite needs to understand that. There is clear lines of delineation that your IT group is never going to penetrate, nor do they want to. So then you have to get your OT people to start stepping up, take the reins of this and say, okay, you are going to have to participate and I'm going to help you. They have to start developing their own budgets, their own funding, building their own relationships with the vendors who specialize in this space. You just can't go to an IT partner who sells Fortinet hardware, for example, and expect that IT VAR to come down there and start working on your plant floor and know exactly how I'm going to secure and protect this environment without even understanding anything about the relationships between those machine centers. And how do you get that? How do you know which PLCs are talking to which PLCs, which HMIs, which engineering workstations? How do you know what's in control, what that process is supposed to work? And it can change, right? It could be a seasonal, a product change, and all of a sudden relationships within those machine centers can change month to month, week to week, quarter to quarter. You never know. How do you get your arms around that, right? And there's tools and technology we have today that will do that, but you have to have some knowledge of the process and operations of that plant. And if you're not willing to learn that, you can't secure that.
There are options for organizations. There are things they can do, whether that's choose a tool, start working with your local vendors. If they're halfway through the journey, maybe they're just trying to get more of that east-west traffic, not just the north-south traffic. One choice, which is, in my opinion, a very poor choice, and hopefully no organization makes this, you can choose to do nothing. You can choose to ignore it, keep your head buried in the sand, and just let it go status quo and hope you're not the next victim of a situation. But that is a choice that they are entitled to. But if they're looking at truly trying to mitigate risk for the organization, they have to go back to that same amount of due diligence and care on the manufacturing environment, those industrial control systems, as they do the IT, and they're just not doing it.
You got to think of it like safety. You can't do nothing when it comes to safety, right? That's an option.
Some people do, and the OSHA doesn't like it, but some people do.
Yeah, they do until then they get fined when somebody gets hurt or killed, and then they deal with that, and you get the bad rap, and then your safety numbers that you had with nobody got hurt for 780 days goes back to zero, and the bonuses reset, and all other kind of metrics reset when that happens. And again, you can be that way. You could act like a third world country operating your plant, run stuff till it breaks, don't care if people get hurt. And who wants to do business with them?
Nobody does.
You don't want to go work in that plant if it's not safe. I don't want to go to that plant. No. So that's not an option.
If you look at just the general things, the workload, the stress, just you and I, from just managing the business, the stress is pretty high intense. But if I were CISO, let's pick a company that makes bleach that I use to wash my clothes with that had a $500 million incident last year. Again, I can imagine the stress load of that on top of the number of hours that they're putting in every week, the responsibility of 15, 20, 100 different locations around the globe. How do you even comprehend managing that responsibility just as in general, not to mention when you look at it from our aspect on the plant floor of going down and managing assets that you don't know really what they do, or you don't really have any control over them. But just in general, there's a lot of stuff going on. I could see why people would quit. I'd want to too sometimes.
Well, you have an explosive growth in the Internet of Things, the edge of your network, the complexities that those technologies bring. You got the sophistication of the bad actors out there, right? Yeah. And then throw AI into the mix on top of all of this. Yeah. And it's like the gerbil on the wheel. You can run as fast as you want. You just can't get where you want to go. And so this responsibility falls to them. And so a lot of them just, to your point, the workload, the stress, responsibility, and can't really make effective change within the environment. Well, the easiest path for them is out the door,
I'm giving you responsibility, but I'm not giving you authority to make a change, because We've seen it 100 times. We walk in and the plant manager's got their own internet pulled in because you've got a CISO or a VP of IT that says, hey, you can't have access to that. And plant manager, again, tasked with different metrics, says, I'm told make stuff. So I called the internet service provider. I got an internet line. We're up and making stuff because that's what my whole team is paid based off of on metrics. And we had to do that. So I can't, you've said this a ton of times. Security gets in the way of progress.
And they don't equate it like safety, right? I mean, from a corporate global perspective, everybody understands the responsibility of safety, but the execution has got to be done locally, right? And the people in the plant level have to be responsible for safety, right? You can't sit in some corporate office somewhere and make sure that somebody is not working in the plant unsafe, not wearing the proper PPE, doing things that are unsafe, whether it's with hazardous materials or high work, working up on top of scaffolding or ladders and not tying off and not putting cones, not having multiple people in place to do that. It has to be done at the local level to ensure the safety that you're really after. So to me, cybersecurity in regards to these industrial assets, these control systems, you have to have the same mindset, right? Think globally, act locally. In order to do that, you have to have a really good understanding of what's going on within that plant. And the challenge there is to what you just said, cybersecurity gets in the way of getting things done if you're the operators and the plant management teams that are just trying to make goods, quality goods, at a reasonable price and having their assets available to do it. And they don't really think about cybersecurity as being their problem or responsibility. And so as a CISO, the CISOs that we engage with, and we do this a lot for our listeners.
No, absolutely.
Once they recognize, or they maybe even kind of know what the problem is, they're just looking away to shield themselves from what they can manage versus the things that they can't. And the things that they can't fall to somebody else. And the question then is, well, then who does that fall to? And the senior leadership, what are they trying to do to solve that problem in my purview? And we had a CIO that we were working with, and the question became, are you exercising the same amount of due diligence to secure and protect your industrial control system environment as you do the enterprise? And the response from that CIO was, well, do you know how much that's going to cost? And the answer is, yeah, I got a pretty good idea. And that person knew the resources that you need, the budgeting that you need, and boots on the ground to get your arms around what's at the peripheral of that network, at the edge of that environment. To them, it seems monumental, right?
Well, it's different. You look at an IT infrastructure and an IT organization where you can have 3 or 4 engineers that are managing the network from a remote location that can log in, do everything. They don't have to be boots on the ground. The entire network is accessible via remote access. It's a different situation, different organization. We look at how many resources are required just to manage the OT environment in general as related to an IT environment. And then you take an organization, let's say it's got 10 facilities or 15 facilities, whatever, not real large. And then you have a CISO with 1 staff member or 2 people on their staff that's responsible to try and manage all of that. It's no wonder that you can't get to everything. You can't do it all. It's just not feasible.
Well, and then you interject third parties, the ecosystem of OT suppliers in this space that are working almost independently with the client per se on the machines that they're providing to their customer and not really thinking about cybersecurity measures that they can implement into the machines that they're deploying. They do it with safety. They were forced to do that with safety. Again, back to that conversation. Why can't they do the same thing with cybersecurity around the digital outcomes that are produced from these physical connected systems?
I think that's coming, though, Dino. If you look at the evolution of safety in the industrial environment, today we have OSHA that does a great job of managing, and that they've got guidelines and you've got reporting requirements. You have all this stuff. The cyber physical connected world is still kind of in the wild, wild west. This is still very new.
It is, even to the extent that when you talk about regulations, OSHA you bring up, and any other regulations that organizations, depending on their vertical or, are supposed to be following. But when it comes to cybersecurity, there's no teeth in it. And for obvious reasons, you can listen to the debate that it stifles innovation and people will look for ways skirted. And if you're in certain municipalities, for example, critical infrastructure with water, wastewater, maybe even power, again, back to the resources. They don't have the staff, they don't have the resources. And then you have these new technologies that are coming in that are built and geared for that, which aren't necessarily something that IT really understands how to manage that within that industrial environment without being disruptive. Because we've witnessed the tools that IT does use from a cybersecurity perspective, putting into the control system, whether it's EDR that they're putting on the HMIs or whether it's networking tools they're putting in there or scanning the network, they're very disruptive, right? Again, unplanned, unscheduled downtime due to the influence of IT technologies being disruptive to that control system environment. So then you have OT looking for ways to evade that, right? To not have that impact. And so whether they disconnect, put in their own network connections for remote access, don't work with IT when they're wanting to build and buy a $25 million piece of equipment that's coming into this plant to determine the technologies that are going in there, the cybersecurity technologies that should be deployed around that environment, they're not working together, from either side. And so can they get there? Sure. But it's going to take an orchestrated effort from both of them. We all hear about converged IT and OT. Sounds great.
Yeah.
In practice, not
always that well.
Right?
Yeah, true.
It's like, I'm going to use an analogy. I took my son to a NASCAR race this weekend, and we got infield tickets. So we were walking through the garage. We actually got onto the track. And while we were out there, he made a comment and he goes, when I came home, Dad, I actually brought my car to the track and I raced it. And I had no idea. I just had that deer in the headlight look when he said that, right? I pay for the car's in my name. I pay for the insurance. And he's out here running that car he's racing this car. And that doesn't tell mom and dad what he's doing. That's the plant floor.
Yeah, it's easier to beg forgiveness than ask permission when you know the answer is going to be.
I felt like the CISO at that particular point in time when he made that comment. So again, they have a charter and they have this asset that's in their control to do what they need to do with it.
Right.
And sometimes they take it to places that they're not supposed to, at least that I wasn't aware. So that being said, when you think about these machines that the clients buy from all over the world, right? These machine centers come from all over the world that are landing in these plants and they're connected, external connections, they're connected within the enterprise, even within the enterprise, when they're connected, nobody's really sure what the activity and transactions are going on between some third party that's sitting in Europe that's connecting to my laser cutter that I have in my plant. Because the plant people are calling up and saying, hey, this thing's not working right. I need help. And they gain remote access in there. And once they land into that plant, they have free reign. So it's a challenge, right? And if you're a CISO with a few people on staff that don't even have the background and skill
they don't
with these tools, with these control system environments, their architecture and how those things are built, the level of whether there's Unix machines out there with soft PLCs, whether there's web servers out there, whether there's cellular modems in that machine center, VPN concentrators, whatever they want to put into that machine center is usually unbeknownst to the IT organization.
Well, yeah, when you look at a CISO, and most of them are master level or higher, trained in theory and concepts and IT frameworks and stuff like that. They're not trained and skilled in OT assets and the differences of the two. And we know this firsthand. The tool sets that work on the IT side are disruptive and not conducive to the OT environment. So now it'd be like me going out tomorrow and saying, you know what? I'm going to be a surgeon. I'm going to take a couple online courses. My hand is pretty steady. I'm going to be a surgeon for whatever. It's different. I know that's an extreme analogy, but you don't understand. And the plant managers can't be the CISO, and the CISO can't be the plant manager.
Safety and unplanned, unscheduled downtime are the top priorities in any plant. It's not, you need to get that device off my network, or you need to redesign your network. And that could take you a year in one plant to be able to do that without being disruptive.
Well, I think that there's a couple things that, in my opinion, that really should begin shaping our industry and moving toward, and that's more of a collaborative approach. how can the IT teams and the OT teams work together? Can they become one organization that reports to a particular leader that has responsibility over both, that understands equally as much the importance on uptime, safety, as they do on risk governance? And how do you marry those two and bring together a collaborative team? Let's call it a working group, for lack of a better term, that has 2 or 3 engineers on it, a couple of different controls engineers, plant manager, some process control, some IT people, some risk, and almost like a committee of cross-functional.
It has to be external resources on that. It can't be all internal, right? You can't do this inside, even if you're a very large global company and think that you're doing the right thing, right? You need, just right, if you're a publicly traded company, you're going to have third-party audits. It's just a requirement, right? There's if and ors and buts about it. The same thing needs to happen here. There needs to be external resources with the capabilities who probably understand your vertical pretty well, probably have a lot to do with the plants that they built your plants. They put a lot of the machinery into those plants. They program those machines. They maintain those machines. That relationship is what needs to be fostered, and that's what I don't see happening at a scale to provide direction and strategy in regards to improving cybersecurity posture in your industrial control environment.
Yeah, the at scale is critical to what you just said. There are organizations that can help and guide that can't necessarily deliver, and they say, here's what you should be doing, and then they leave it to the organization to figure out how that works. And I bet you if I've talked with one plant engineer, I've talked with 1,000 of them, and every one of them is working 60 hours a week, getting paid for a standard 40 because of their salary. They've got 15 jobs. They're barely getting 12 of them done. And they for sure do not want extra work to do to try and figure something else out. Well, they are all passionate, and they all are very driven to do what's right to help their organization. But there's only so many hours in a day, and they just can't continue to do because
they focus on what they know. They do. We've seen that. I mean, we've seen CIOs that basically will turn a blind eye to the plant because they don't have the resources, they don't have the time for all the things that you just described. So they got to focus on the things that they can focus on and the things that they know, right? And the landscape is changing. The threats are evolving. I mean, look what came out on the news today and how they're using pagers as weapons, right? Again, the landscape is continually evolving, and it's no different. And so how do you stay abreast of that, right? And if you're not working with outside groups, especially outside groups that have just a deep understanding, that are deeply rooted into the OT environment and how these machines are set up and how they operate and how they're connected and what they're supposed to be doing, how are you going to marry that relationship? And I'm not saying that it can't be done, but what I witness is that it's not being done. I mean, how many businesses have we been into that have bought a tool that IT's got and the OT guys aren't receiving any benefit or any value from the data from an OT cybersecurity platform that the IT guys bought, and or their partners that they work with?
Yeah, and OT is still trying to catch up to IT. I get it. IT's had a 25-year running head start. Conceptually, I fully get that, but they have to make changes, and the landscaping is changing so quickly. You know, prior to today, when the pager started blowing up, I would have never given 1 second of thought to, should I put my phone to my ear and make a call? To me, that's scary. The technology is there. I get to different environment, different situation, but as organizations are now trying to figure out what is right and what is wrong, other organizations, there's no line they won't cross, whether that is geopolitical, whether that is sabotage and chaos, whether that is ransomware, what makes no difference. We that have, I would call, morals and values are really different than organizations or people or whoever that has no distinguish. They just go, and they don't care what damage is done.
Right. And for those that are relying on cybersecurity insurance to bail them out, are in for a rude awakening.
That's a mistake. Yeah,
it is, right? Because there's a lot to think that, right? I got a $20 million policy. Well, that's to help you remediate and mitigate what happened to you, but it's not for the business disruption that you had, for the millions of dollars you probably lost by not making goods for a while, right? That's money that's gone, right? Your operational costs, they're just gone, right? And so, but there are people out there that say, well, I got a big insurance policy, I'll be okay. It's no, you won't. You have 30 plants shut down for a few weeks. Do the math, right? And you probably know those numbers because you went through COVID. You got a pretty good idea, right? So there's that aspect of it also for those that are out there relying on cybersecurity insurance to get them out of a spot.
Well, if you just do some real quick dirty math, if I'm an organization and I do $12 billion annually, $1 billion a month, and I have a cyber event and my facility is offline for 1 week, not a real long time, but for 1 week, that is $250 million. $250 million for a week. That's a big number.
And let's say that's 12 plants, right? And now you've lost 12 plants for that week. More like a month, because the average downtime impacted once these things evolve and those material breaches get into your plant, you're looking at a month or longer to get back up and running.
Yeah. It's not an easy overnight process. It gets more expensive. The requirements from a vendor, and again, I heard this from the conference last week, is how are organizations on both sides, the end user pushing back and requiring secure by design. And a new word that I heard, which is interesting to say the least, is secure by demand, meaning that we will not procure this unless you do X, whether that is added into it, modify it, give us the code so we can validate it, whatever that is.
But how often do you think that's happening? I mean, generally speaking.
I would say not very, but I look at our organization and some of the pushback that we're receiving then and that we're giving from a procurement vendor relationship from a supply chain. Look at critical choke points. Regardless of where it is, if you rely on one vendor to supply a particular thing in your environment, but that vendor, let's say you make beer and you buy your can from XYZ, and so does every other beer maker in the country. If that can maker has a problem and it affects all the beer production in the country, that's an issue.
They'll be filling up a lot of kegs.
They'll be doing a lot of something, that's for sure.
And then don't forget, you also have the SEC who's imposing rules, especially on publicly traded companies, where you have to disclose to your investors within, 48 hours or something like that?
72, I believe, yeah.
If you have a material breach, so they can decide on whether they want to stick around or not and leave their money with you, right? And so, again, attack to your brand and to your investment supply chain is all at risk, right? I mean, we make this sound like it's unachievable, but it's not, though. It's really, really not. It's about putting the right players in place and having conversations and have real conversations to get past the myths and the hearsay and the naysayers, right? And IT needs to be humbled, I think, to some extent, because their practices don't always fit in that control system environment.
Well, yeah, it's got to be cooperation. It's got to be teamwork. It's got to be both sides wanting to solve the problem. But you got to start somewhere. You can't continue to ignore it. You can't let it go. You got to reach out to organizations that can help you, that can support you, that are working in that environment, that are there to be a partner to you and say, look, we know we have problems. Help us understand the extent of how bad they are, and help us work through, prioritize, and figure out how we can start addressing them. But you're right. You can't, you got to pull your head out of the sand. You got to look up. You got to stand tall. You got to march forward. And you got to say, we're going to eat this elephant one bite at a time. If it takes us 5 years, we are going to do this.
Well, it's either that or they're focused on other problems, I guess they feel that are bigger.
Well, you can't be lucky every single day. I'm just going to tell you. Every day, the bad guys only got to get lucky one time. You got to be lucky every minute of every day to make sure that nothing happens. You can't. Statistics don't lie. Statistics are not on your side.
Thanks for tuning in to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to click the follow or subscribe button now. And if you found this podcast helpful or have a topic you'd like us to discuss, please leave us a review or let us know. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.